Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the It's a Mind Game podcast. My name is Jade, and I am a mindset coach and personal trainer specializing in female specific training protocols. Today, I'm joined by the incredible Jacqueline, who I don't know if you can hear the smile through my voice, but I think my smile could explode off my face because I'm so excited to have her with us today. Seeing it has been a little while, Jacqueline, I would love for you to share with us a little bit about yourself and the types of women you help.
Thank you so much for having me back, Jade. My smile is mirroring yours right back at you. I am a clinical psychotherapist and I specialize in eating disorders and body image and support people through the whole experience of disordered eating and disordered experiences of their body as well. So sometimes that fits within more of a clinical criteria, and sometimes that sits underneath that or around that, which is something we might end up talking a bit more about today.
Yes, and I'm so excited to dive into the topic that we've chosen because it presents itself a lot, whether it be with clients or even sometimes just in social groups. And that is, how do we tell the difference between perhaps a food criteria that helps us be healthy and food rules that are perhaps now become toxic and there's heavy emotions attached like anxiety or fear, or it's just food's no longer easy anymore. If I was to speak broadly of an example, it would be more, say, orthorexia, where it starts off as I'm making good choices to benefit my body, and suddenly it turns into something that's making us sick. If we're trying to identify good food choices versus something that's taking away from our health, how can we start to debunk that?
It's a really important question, and I think that terrain can get quite confusing. It's nuanced. Pardon me. The the easiest way I think to discern between the two categories of what would be in the realm of more disordered eating and eventually a clinical eating disorder, and what is more based on someone's personal preferences and their values and belief systems, is really just to what you were speaking about in the fear and anxiety that's present in their experience. And also, we'd look very much to how it was impacting the way they want to live their life and their own value system. So if someone, say, was really fused to a rule that they had about food, say, and I'd love to unpack orthorexia a little bit more as well and explain exactly what that is. But say someone was really trying to focus on, say, for example, eating only organic food, but their family would invite them over for dinner or they'd gather with friends or colleagues, and the food served wasn't meeting the definitions of what they would prefer to engage in eating. If that meant they couldn't attend the event or they couldn't compromise or occasionally make an exception, and they were distressed about that, which is the most important factor, if they
Mhm.
felt okay with that versus them feeling, I really want to be there and I feel like I'm missing out and I want to really be able to go along with this, but it would be too anxiety provoking for me to be able to do that, then that starts to look more disordered from our perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of the organic because that's something that can, I guess, reach out to people who have health conscious and also not. It's just my shopping list is organic. Um, I also find that women, when they're trying to decide whether it's an eating disorder or it's just an eating criteria, is a very, I guess, entry level observation is just that emotional response to being exposed to it. And if there is it's not organic, but what do you do? It's mum and dad's house. It's it's kind of easy to work with. It's not your top priority, it's not your best preference, but it's not the end of the world that it's not. A conversation I had with recently with one of the women that I work with, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, is the observation of you do the best you can with what's available to you, and sometimes it's going to be a 10 out of 10, and sometimes it's going to be a 5 out of 10. But your confidence comes from just that. You do the best with what you've got. So if you're at the supermarket and there's the options that you prefer, of course, take the options that you prefer. But if you are about to go out and perhaps you're going to go somewhere where there's food trucks and you really don't know what's on offer, who's going to be there, what line's big, what line's small, it comes down to that. Just again, you could have 10 food trucks in front of you and you still pick the best one with what your food values are. But you're not in this place of, I can't eat at the food truck because I need my supermarket food that's at my home in my fridge.
I think that illustration is really tangible and helps put it in the context of real life and real time. And what I wanted to pick up in what you said as well is that to me, it would actually be okay, say in that example of going to your parents' house and there's no organic food, or it might even be interesting to include like intolerances into this conversation. Probably not allergies if there's dire consequences to having foods you're allergic to that may be just a non-negotiable full stop for you. But if there are foods that you tend to react to on a spectrum and maybe sometimes can tolerate a little bit of, but don't feel amazing after you have it, I find that interesting to include in this conversation as well, because the intersection of your well-being and your needs and those around you, but then also the social component of your well-being and needs starts to get a bit more complicated. But to me, it would also be okay in that scenario for the person, say there was only a 3 out of 10 option available, and the person had a bit of a boundary around somewhere around maybe the 5 out of 10 mark, and actually said, you know what, mum and dad, I'm probably not going to feel amazing, even just digestively, physiologically, if I have this food. So I might grab something down the road, or I might bring something with me, but I'd love to still sit with you and enjoying this meal and occasion. And that sat pretty comfortably with the person, even if they were getting pushback or given a hard time by the people they were around and encouraged to be more compromising. I think there's a really interesting kind of underdog version to their story as well, that in a history of women often feeling like they have to be quite people pleasing and can't set boundaries. What does that look like with food? And where also that can feed into things like overeating and not holding boundaries with, say, you feeling full and not feeling pushed to take a second helping. That's a whole other tangent we could go down. So it actually then again is defined more by that person's emotional experience than their physical actions, because in that scenario, if they feel quite confident and settled with that choice, that the food available actually didn't meet the minimum standard of what I would like to eat, and I won't be able to participate in the food, but I'm happy to be here. I'm not distressed by not joining in. I've got other options I can resource for myself. I can go ahead and get my needs met and connect socially, etc. Versus feeling internal shame, panic, embarrassment. I really don't want to eat this food, but I'm going to have to, or I'll be judged, or if I want to eat it, but if I do, I'll feel really distressed about what my brain will tell me about these food choices, or I've broken some sort of rule. And then that person can't actually enjoy the occasion because they're so distracted by those emotions and feelings, or they don't participate at all and they don't go to the event, which can sometimes be the appropriate thing to do. That can be a boundary as well. But if they wanted to and they didn't feel they could participate, that would indicate that it's more in conflict with an inner value system and with that person's expression of their authentic self.
What I love so much about what you just explored there is there's no perfect rule. It's complicated. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that in order for you to have confidence with your food choices, it could mean there's different criteria for different events. And that comes along with perhaps a food intolerance or a food value system, or even just what your emotional exposure is to the people that are surrounding you. And I don't know, in my head, I just see an umbrella. It's like we're talking about the difference between food confidence and, let's say, an eating disorder. But the top of the umbrella is where we're going into. So some things that you touched on was like, okay, you're going to mum and dad's house, and perhaps you do have a food intolerance. And a common one is you're sensitive to gluten. So you're not celiac, but you do have some form of a reaction when you have gluten. That's a real thing. Depending on mum and dad's thoughts, we've been eating bread and pasta for 100 years. It's all in your head. Stop making it up. Just eat the pasta. That can be really uncomfortable. So if there is space for a conversation of, look, I'm just going to bring my own dinner because I really want to be with you, but I don't want to have the tummy upset, there's actually a confidence in holding those boundaries versus perhaps feeling like you have to eat the food because we've been eating it, quote unquote, for 100 years and you're making it up. If you consume the food, there is the discomfort. We also create almost like a betrayal with ourselves, which can lead to some really negative emotions and almost like a self destructive routine. Because if we have a knowing of what works well for our body and what doesn't, and then we go against that because of someone else, I'm not sure, Jacqueline, of whether it be personally or within the clinic, is there a sense of betrayal that can come up? And that can often feel worse than holding your ground and going, actually, I'm coming, I can't wait, but I'm just going to have my dinner that makes me feel good.
I think that's really powerful, Jade, and betrayal is the the correct word in that sense of if we think about how we'd feel, say if there was a scenario where we felt something might come up that we're uncomfortable around, a topic of conversation or a request, and we asked our partner to really have our back if that came up, and they guaranteed us that they would. And then we got into that situation and the worst case scenario happened and our partner didn't back us up and wasn't there for us. It would be that feeling of, oh, he just threw me under the bus, that I
Mm.
didn't feel valued, I didn't feel protected by you. So why wouldn't we have that same experience between us and ourselves and our relationship with ourselves, that in the privacy of our own conversations with ourselves, we know that these foods might not be working for us, or eating in a particular way, which in some family cultures might include overeating, doesn't make us feel good. But then when we're in the situation, we're so biased to pleasing others and managing their expectations that we just override our body and override our future self. And that does create a mistrust in ourselves. And that often might be where people feel like their only option is then avoidance, because it's easier just not to go to the thing than to go and hold boundaries and be judged or risk being misunderstood. So I think that's hugely relevant and really important.
And there can be difficult conversations when I feel like our generations are a lot more aware of how different bodies respond to different foods, where perhaps past generations, I don't know where there's a difference between they've just become so familiar with feeling a particular way that that's normal. So it's like there is a bloat that happens after pasta, let's say, but that's just what happens when you eat pasta. But then you've got someone who perhaps has experimented with food and they go, well, actually, if I have, let's say, rice, I feel really like it's not a broad carbohydrate issue. It's no pasta in particular. It just doesn't feel good in my body. Sometimes it might affect my mood. It makes me feel groggy. They're very common and normal responses to people who are perhaps more intuitive to how they feel after consuming something. And there can be a pushback based on lack of knowledge. And you can see that from a cultural standpoint, or even, a personal experience is if I have cruciferous vegetables, which is something that I love, it's not good for my system. I hold a lot of fluid, my belly feels really heavy. Um, and if I share that with most people, like, what do you mean? Cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, they're the best. You have to have them. You're crazy. And I've done enough laps around the block to know how my body feels, why it feels it, and how to work around it. To, I guess, water on a duck's back comes to mind, where I can share it. And if there's pushback on it, it's not a personal attack. It's just, I know. And that's actually all that matters. And I also know that I'm not avoiding these foods because of a weight loss target, of fitting a mold of a particular Fitspo. Um, it's there's no shield here. It's an authentic experience, which if you can work out what your food values are and actually be able to identify how food feels within your body, I feel like the shield comes with that. Because if you have a knowing, it's like you don't need to prove it to anybody. If you were to go on the extreme end, because you brought up food allergies, if you were allergic to peanuts, and someone said, oh, just have the peanut, it's in your head, you're not going to do that because you know how detrimental it is to your health. Even if someone says it's made up, anaphylaxis doesn't even exist, there is nothing that's going to make you eat that peanut. And we can actually have that similar shield when it comes to an intolerance or other food preferences. And then, I don't know, I guess the magic comes with that finding the balance of how do you make what you require to feel good around food with the masses.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really good, Jade. 'Cause I was thinking as well how when you've had any history with disordered eating or you have gone through a tricky time with food, it's more likely that you would gaslight yourself or even have people around you be more doubting. Like if you're avoiding a certain food, maybe they assume that you're worried about weight gain when it's actually that you've noticed that food doesn't work particularly for you. But sometimes people struggle to upgrade their understanding as quickly as someone's evolving in their own personal growth. So there is that misunderstanding that if you're if you're experiencing it this way, it must only be because of this context. And I think it's helpful to reference other scenarios where it might not be about food even, like say you were asked to go to something at a particularly late time and you know that you're just not a night owl and those hours don't work for you and you'll be exhausted the next day, or another form of compromising something about your well-being that wasn't specifically about food, and how you would hold that boundary. And of course, some people struggle with boundaries more broadly, and it's hard to say no in many regards. But it might be a helpful reference point if food's particularly tricky for you to articulate your needs around because of a history with that or for other reasons, that imagining what you'd say if you were asked to, well, let's meet up at 2 a.m. and that we'll catch up then, that you would be able to say, oh, look, I don't think that's going to work for me. I'll be too tired the next day. Why don't we meet at this time? Then if it was suggested, oh, let's meet over this type of food and we'll all engage in this type of eating, if that similarly was going to make you feel not very well the next day, or it just didn't fit with how you were wanting to treat your body, why couldn't you borrow similar language to advocate for your needs and work within, yes, a zone of mutual compromise, but also, I think on average, most people probably listening to this have spent more of their life over compromising than under compromising. So most of us can take a pretty safe bet that the area for us to grow and compensate for that will actually be increasingly individualizing and advocating for our own needs than learning to compromise or meet other people's needs.
I love that example because I think for most people listening, if someone was to give them a 2 a.m. catch up, it would be a very easy no, thank you, and no emotion attached to it, right? It's just a no, that is, I
Yeah.
sleep at that time. And if we could have that sort of resilience or even confidence around food, it becomes quite effortless all of a sudden. It's like, happy to participate, but here's how I do it. Here's where I'm going to go. Here's where you could join me, right? Because we can also shift plans and change offerings versus always saying, being the yes person. We can be the person who brainstorms and offers other solutions. So I really love that example. I wonder, I feel like we've broken down quite well the difference between perhaps an eating disorder where there's this overwhelming amount of emotion behind a food choice, whether it be anxiety, fear, panic, versus perhaps food values, which is just, oh, I would just rather eat this. I can do the other, but I'd prefer this. Alongside that is having that balance of doing the best I can with what's available. So I might have my food values, but if I can do it 8 out of 10 times, I'm happy. If it's 6 out of 10, that still works for me. It doesn't have to be 10 out of 10 because our mind can be a little bit sneaky where we go, oh no, no, I'm definitely in the food values lane. However, it has to be perfect, which then you could go, well, perfection is impossible for us to do day in, day out, at home, out and about, wherever our lives lead us. If someone's listening to this thinking, I'm pretty sure I'm in the food values lane, but I'm not totally convinced. Is there a particular question they could maybe ask themselves or journal about that might just help to break down which lane they're actually in? A nice little starting point.
Such a good question, Jade. That's a really good idea. And what comes to mind is what would be the first thing to come up if you couldn't execute that preference?
I love
So
that.
with the gluten example, so I resonate with that one. If it was okay, so I participate in eating gluten pasta. Even talking about it with you now, I can feel my stomach hurting just thinking about it.
I don't want to do it.
I'm going to pay for that. That's going to hurt. And that for me solidifies the value behind it is really self-care. Like I don't want to be in pain. I don't go to, it doesn't go to a place of fear about other outcomes or body image or other things that might come up around it. It's like I'm going to feel sick, so I'm concerned about feeling sick. But if it did come up in other areas, that might be a bit of a clue, or it might be both. Like I'm scared of feeling sick, or I feel like there'll be some sort of repercussion that doesn't sit well with me eating that food, and I'd probably gain weight and I'm afraid of that, then it's just noticing that both are at play. Or if it was more the latter, then that might be, it's not even necessarily wrong or not okay to have that concern, but it's just noticing if we flipped it, what is coming up in resistance of moving in that direction, just to double check that we're clear on it. And
That's
just
a
the
wonderful
level
one.
of anxiety, maybe rating it out of 10 as well, because if it was, I mean, for me, the pain can be quite severe, so that number might still be quite high. If I found out I accidentally had a serving of gluten pasta when I thought it was gluten-free,
Mm-hmm.
it'd probably be quite a high number, because I'd know that I was about to be in significant pain and that would probably last for a while. But it's still an interesting point on the map to reflect on. Is it, am I surprised by how high that is? And am I okay? Like if I accidentally found out the food wasn't organic, does that feel like I'm really at risk of something bad happening? And am I okay with being that unsettled by it? Maybe so.
Yeah. So I guess it's identifying the types of foods that perhaps we feel we hold more conflict around, whether it be like
Mhm.
what's negotiable, what's not, and assessing the emotional response that comes with it as well as a physical response. Because your example with the gluten, you hear that suggestion and there's a physical response because you know what happens when you consume gluten. So there's an emotion attached, but it's influenced by a physical experience that you've had in the past. So it's a very good way of your brain going, no, do not do that. However, if you've got a food perhaps where peanut butter comes to mind, because that tends to be a popular one, where if you're not allergic to peanut butter, but you just, someone says, oh, just try this teaspoon, it's so good, I just got it from the shops. If you instantly have that, I don't want to, I can't, don't make me do it, that is something to lean into, because if we know there's no allergy, where there's no intolerance, what's taking your breath away
Mhm.
about that offering,
Mm.
and starting there.
Really well said. Yeah.
Jacqueline, as always, I've had so much fun speaking with you, and I feel like that was a very helpful and informative conversation for all of our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Jade. I could talk forever with you, and I hope that it was helpful to just tease some of those questions out a little bit more for listeners today.
Absolutely perfect, Jacqueline. I'm going to leave the contact details for both Jacqueline and I in the show notes. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it with someone who would find it helpful as well, or give us a 5-star review. That would be amazing. And for now, we will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for listening. Bye for now.